All right. Welcome, everybody, to the 20th episode of the Extraordinaire Within You. And thank you to all our audience that tune in every session to join us. Today, we have a very, very special guest with us. And before I do an amazing introduction for our esteemed Dr. Gabbe, I just want to remind everyone of the vision and mission of this program of the Extraordinary Within You is to really create a platform for global mentorship to hear from and learn from such great and inspiring leaders like our guest today, Dr. Gabbe. Dr. Gabbe is one of the most respected leaders in academic medicine and maternal fetal medicine. Throughout an extraordinary career spanning decades, he has served as the chair of the OBGYN at both the Ohio State and the University of Washington, as well as the dean of the Vanderbilt University and CEO of the Ohio State. He is an internationally recognized expert in high-risk pregnancy and diabetes in pregnancy, as well as a member of the National Academy of Medicine, former president of the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, SRI, CUCOG, AGOS, as well as a senior editor of the landmark textbook, Obstetrics, Normal and Abnormal Pregnancies, a resource that has educated generations of OBGYNs around the world. But what makes Dr. Gabbe truly extraordinary extends far beyond his remarkable resume. Throughout his career, he has consistently championed excellence in patient care, education, mentorship, and leadership, and has been such a powerful advocate for physician resilience and well-being. Dr. Gabbe, thank you so much for all the countless lives you've impacted, and most importantly, for being so gracious with your time and joining Vincenzo Verghella and myself today. We are so honored to have you.
Well, I'm so happy to be here with you, and I'm honored as well to be a part of this extraordinary series you've created. And thank you for what you're doing to support the well-being of our colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we always start all our sessions with gratitude. So I'd love to invite you to share anything you're grateful for, and then we'll take turns doing that, and then we'll jump into so many amazing questions we have for you.
Well, I'm grateful for being here. I've now lived almost 60 years with type 1 diabetes, and I am a 17-year cancer survivor.
Wow.
And we can talk about that later. And furthermore, not only am I happy to be here, but today is our granddaughter Hazel's 4th birthday. So I'm very happy to be here. And I have one more major thanks to give, and that's to our son Adam, an Ohio State graduate, Peace Corps volunteer who now runs my wife Pat's family's farm/ranch in Central Oregon, where for the past week he has been battling forest fires night and day with other firefighters, with neighbors and friends. And just today, we got a note from him. It looks like the houses of our family members will be saved. It was really touch and go for a number of days. A lot to be thankful for.
Wow. Thank you so much. Absolutely. And I'm glad to hear everything is going well there too. Sorry for all the challenges that he had to face there, but thank you for sharing all that gratitude. Vincenzo, what about you?
Well, I'm also thankful to be here today. Steve, earlier I watched your lecture. As you can see, I have the proof because I have
Thank you.
the 10 keys. I've watched the whole thing. It was amazing. Hopefully we can talk about some of that. And since number one is family and friends, today's Monday. So yesterday, went to see the World Cup game with my second son, who just bought a house in Philadelphia, 25th, and Christian, I know you were somewhat, been in Philadelphia, Penn.
Sure.
And actually, my younger son, 4-year-old himself, just like your 4-year-old grandson, was around. So the three of us watched the game together. Very thankful for family and friends. My wife actually works at CHOP, Steve, and
Yes.
is soon going to be a Penn faculty, and she's a fellow now. And so very, very thankful for family. Yeah. Kavita, what about you?
Thank you. Definitely family and friends, always number one on the list as well. But I think today I'm especially grateful for mentorship, for inspiration and mentorship. I wouldn't be here today without so many incredible mentors along my journey who have also inspired me to then mentor and pay it forward and can to mentor other students as well. And to have this opportunity to sit down with such great leaders and mentors like you both, I'm very touched right now and I'm so excited to start a conversation and share your stories. So thank you both immensely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dr. Gabby, we always start our first question taking you all the way back to your childhood. That's
Yes.
one of my favorite questions to begin with. Is if you could share a little bit about how your childhood and upbringing shaped who you are as your person as well as your career.
Well, I come from a family of teachers. My mother, my father, my sister, my aunts were teachers. So I saw the rewarding experiences they had, sometimes frustrating experiences as well, teaching their students. And I always thought that somewhere along the way I would be teaching, which I obviously have done a great deal of. When I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, we lived in a three-family house. My grandparents, my mother's folks on the first floor, my Aunt Lil and her husband, and three boys on the second floor. And we were, my sister and I, my mom and dad, on the third floor. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my grandmother developed cancer. And we would go to her apartment each evening to care for her, really hospice palliative care. And our family physician, who actually had also delivered me, would come to see her and care for her. And I saw how much he helped her. Not a lot he could do, but he certainly helped her through his support, and how meaningful his time with our family was and how respected he was. And there were no physicians in my family, but that interaction with him, Dr. Heimowitz, convinced me that medicine would be something I should seriously think about.
Steve, that's great. And again, I encourage everybody to see your lecture. I just
Mhm.
put it on Facebook. It's all over the internet. It really goes over a lot of these things. But one thing that I wanted to ask you in particular, and I like to ask, is the drive that has fueled, your passion, in medicine. We ask this question to everybody. Sometimes it's a mom, sometimes it's a dad, and they don't have to be medicine, just like you
Right.
just said. But where do you think that comes? What makes it genetics, nature, nurture? Like you worked really hard, like many of us did. All your life, achieved amazing heights. Um, where did it come from?
Well, well, I think my father would tell me many times, do good and don't complain.
Mm.
Uh, if things were tough and I whined a bit about them, my dad would simply say, do good and don't complain. I think he appreciated the opportunities I had and the possibilities for my future. And he encouraged me, supported me, as did my mom. But he would always say, just do good and don't complain. People don't want to hear you complaining.
And were they like, maybe your dad, were they like, as teachers or whatever they were doing, pretty committed and showed kind of
Yes.
the as an examples of hard work?
Exactly. Early morning, he would leave for New York City,
Mm.
come home late, public transportation,
Wow.
worked all weekdays, weekends, holidays if necessary. Yes, they were very, very committed to what they did, and they were great role models for me to see that hard work would be necessary. And I always tell people who are thinking about a career in medicine, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. There's no doubt about it. If you have the passion, if you maintain that love for medicine, that'll go well. But you must be sure that's what you want to make your life's work.
Wow.
Beautiful.
So, it sounds like your first initial inspiration to even go into medicine was the human aspect, the how you saw your grandma being healed. Even not even so it doesn't sound like just the medicine, but it was the human interaction, that bedside manner. Can you talk us a little bit through your journey as to, being the first doctor in your family? It sounds like what did that look like, and how did you get all the way to med school, and just to support the your journey along that path.
Well, it was a lot of education of not only myself, but my family.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I think this is important for all of us, there are many television shows, movies, maybe a lot better uh, information's available. But back in the middle 1960s, the images of medicine were quite unrealistic. And I really don't think many of my family, my parents, appreciated how hard it would be. I remember the first time I told them I wouldn't get home for Thanksgiving because I had to stay, and I was an intern in medicine and I had to stay. I was on duty. They really were surprised that it was a 24/7 commitment, and I had to be sure to educate them very simply, what was done in medical school, what was done in residency training and fellowship. When I was the dean at Vanderbilt, many other medical schools do this. They invite the parents to the med school for a weekend and show them what it's like to be a medical student, the lectures, the labs, and talk about the commitments that are necessary to become a physician. So there was a lot of education that I learned along the way, and that I try to share with my family. As a chair, I would always talk with the partners of our residents. I wanted them to know what their partners were going through, what was going to be a tough rotation, why this rotation was scheduled the way it was, so they could be supportive and understand when things got tough. Sometimes it was an oncology, G1 oncology rotation. Sometimes it was the night float rotation. But I wanted us to be on the same page and then to be on our team as well.
No, no,
Wow.
I love. Go ahead, and sorry.
No, no, so interesting. One thing that it's amazing about your career is you really followed, after residency and fellowship, but division director, then chairman, then dean, then CEO. As high as you can go. Short of president of the United States. I mean, you've been, but I think that should be an inspiration. That's why we're here. To kind of
Yes.
tell young folks, medical students, residents, fellows, where should they go? And, some people, stay away from major administration. Some people like you seemingly are able to do it all. Because the books, the publications, change in, like, diabetes in pregnancy, humongous impact on clinical care. Do you have any words of advice on how to make these choices as opportunities come around? You were at different universities. Any good choices you want to advise? Any choices that maybe looking back, you would have done the same or not?
Yeah, I always say that throughout your career, there will be opportunities you could never have imagined.
Right.
And there will be challenges that you could never have imagined. And early in your career is the time you want to take advantage of those opportunities. It gets much harder as you have taken on responsibilities of leadership at an institution, or you have a family, to move and take advantage of an opportunity somewhere else. But early in your career is when you want to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think this is where mentors come in.
Mm.
I think this is where mentors come in. When I was a senior resident at Boston Hospital for Women, I wrote a letter to Ted Quilligan. I had never met Ted Quilligan. This was 1974, but he was heading the newly created maternal fetal medicine board. And I wrote and told him, Dr. Quilligan, I'm, finishing my residency in Boston. I've done 2 or 3 years of basic research. I've had experience in high risk obstetrics. What would I do next to be eligible for the board exams in MFM? And he responded and he said, Steve, you'll need to do one additional clinical year of high risk obstetrics. And by the way, I know you're interested in diabetes. I've seen some of what you've written. We have a large diabetes clinic. And if you would consider it, we have an opening to lead our diabetes clinic with Dr. Jorge Messman. So there was an opportunity I could never have anticipated. And, you know, and then after a few years, I got a call from Luigi Mastriani at Penn. They had lost their division director, Dick Schwartz, in MFM. They needed at least one more MFM to join Mike Minuti so they could maintain their certified fellowship. Well, I knew Penn well. I had applied to medical school there. I knew many people who'd been there and been on the faculty. Here was a call from one of the best medical schools and medical centers in the country, University of Pennsylvania. Plus, it was closer to my family in the East. And I didn't anticipate that coming. Now, that administrative position came earlier in my career than I had anticipated, but I just felt that it was something I could not turn down. So, unexpected opportunities, weighing them, talking with family and friends, talking with mentors, and deciding if it is time to move on and take advantage of these unanticipated opportunities.
I want to, sorry to jump in, Kavita.
No, please go ahead.
I want to highlight a couple of things, Steve. One is you sought those opportunities, and I think that that's an important message. Not all of them, maybe, but
Yeah.
that sometimes there is a good place, that you know somebody that could be a good mentor. Go for it. Don't wait for the job being posted somewhere or whatever. Make your own career decision. And then, how old were you, if I can ask, when you became division director at Penn? How young is young?
I started at Penn in '78. I was 34.
Wow. and that's I think, but that's encouraging. I think to young people. Should be, not everybody's Steve Gabbe. There's only one, but I think it's important. I became division director when I was young, and I thought it was the best thing in my life. Because then you're exposed to things. You may like it, you may not like it, and you may, eventually do something else. But I think that's a wonderful thing. I actually think that young people make great leaders if they're mature enough and they have the right skills. You don't have to wait till you're 50 or plus, to have leadership positions. I don't know if you want to expand on that or not.
Well, I was very fortunate, both at LA County with Ted Quilligan, George Messman, a wonderful MFM faculty. And I was very fortunate at Penn to have a role model like Luigi Mastriani as the chair, Mike Minuti as a colleague, John Makuta, who led G1 Oncology, Celso Ramon Garcia and reproductive endocrinology. These were wonderful men leaders in their field and really good people who helped me. I look back to my efforts as a division director way back then, before I knew very much about administrative leadership, and we made it through. Mark Landon and Phil Samuels joined us as fellows, and they've been my friends and colleagues for 40 years, and even working with them now at Ohio State, where Mark's the chair of the department. And just wonderful people. And I was very, very fortunate that things went so well that early in my career.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Gabbe. I want to just kind of expand a little bit more on all these. You have so many amazing accomplishments and achievements. But if I were to take a 30,000 feet view of your life and your career, what would you say are probably 3 of the most pivotal or important moments that you would highlight? And you can tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I diagnosed myself to have type 1 diabetes when I was a third-year medical student in February 2nd, 1968. If you ask someone, when did you get diabetes? They'll tell you the date. They remember that date
Wow.
because their life has changed. Now,
Mm.
because I was 20, almost 20, I was 22, they thought I might have type 2 diabetes. They tried to give me oral sulfurios, and they didn't work. So I went on insulin, no meters, regular NPH. It was challenging in one respect. In the other respect, you took your dose of insulin, the same dose every day, and hope for the best.
Mm.
Uh, I moved to Boston 2 years after I developed diabetes, and my internist in New York gave me the name of a famous endocrinologist at the Mass General. I got to Boston and I called him. I said, Dr. So and so, I'm Steve Gabbe. I've just moved to Boston. I'm going to be here for the next 6 or 7 years as a resident and fellow. Dr. So and so in New York recommended you highly. I have juvenile diabetes, was what we called it then. I hope you'll take care of me. And he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, patients with juvenile diabetes are a pain in the ass.
Oh God.
And I limit the number in my practice. Now you're up there at the Boston Hospital for Women. Dr. White is there. She takes care of the pregnant women with diabetes. Maybe she'll take care of you.
Wow.
So I had never heard of Dr. White. I mentioned this to one of my colleagues, and he said, "Oh, that's Dr. White over there." Uh, Dr. White was then 70 years old, uh, small, diminutive woman who'd been at the Joslin at that point for almost 50 years. She was there right after they began giving insulin and developed the first, diabetes and pregnancy program. I walked over to her and I said the same thing to her I had said to that physician at the MGH. And she said, Stephen, always call me by my first name, which I thought was really important. I would be honored to care for you. Come up to the Joslin, let's talk. And that's where it all started. I went to the Joslin. They had a program, it was a week-long program on how to live with diabetes. And she became my doctor. Her younger colleague, who was named Donna Younger, also took care of me. And they really helped me develop the discipline that was needed for living with diabetes at that time. So that was really transformational. When I was in Los Angeles, George Messman, my colleague in the diabetes clinic, became my physician. And I had had diabetes at that point for almost 7 years. And George told me some things that I think everybody needs to know. George said, Steve, I want you to think of diabetes as a condition, not a disease, a condition you live with every day. That simple word, a condition. Yeah, I can live with a condition, not a disease, a condition. And then he said, very forcefully, you will exercise. You will eat a healthy diet. You will never smoke. And you will get good medical care. And you will do better than your colleagues who don't have diabetes. And I never will forget that interaction, the advice he gave me, and obviously he was right. So those two interactions with Priscilla White and with Jorge Messman were very, very important uh, for me.
Thank you so much. And can I ask a little bit, what was the landscape of care for diabetes in pregnant women at that time
Ah,
while you were pioneering all of this? I'd love to
yes. Well, it was very interesting. We would have the patients come to the clinic, for example, at the Joslin. They were all patients with type 1 diabetes. We weren't caring for type 2 diabetes. We saw patients with what we call gestational diabetes in our resident clinic. We saw some of them there. But at the Joslin, the patients would come every week or two. They would get their blood drawn when they came for their visit. We would see them together with Dr. White. Luke Gillespie was the incredibly talented clinician who took care of the obstetric side. Dr. White, Dr. Younger did the diabetes. We talked with them. Now, we would try to estimate if the baby's growth was excessive. We didn't have ultrasound. We would try to estimate later in pregnancy if there was hydramnios. But we would, after the patient went home, we would have that one blood sugar that was measured when they made their visit. And they would tell us what they ate that morning and when they ate it. And we would guesstimate from that number and any reports they gave us about hypoglycemia and the increasing insulin resistance of pregnancy. We would make a guesstimate of what insulin dose they needed. Now, I should say that we hospitalized every patient at the first time we saw her in pregnancy. So every diabetes patient that came in to see us, first visit, she would then come into the hospital for a week so that we could set up her insulin regimen and diet. Then the patient would be hospitalized again at about 20 weeks for us to update her glucose control. And then the patient would be admitted until delivery when, based on her white class. If she was a white class B, maybe she'd come into the hospital at 34 or 5 weeks until she delivered at about 38, 39. Remember, we didn't have ultrasound dating. And these were diabetes patients who often had irregular menses. And if the patient had vasculopathy, nephropathy, hypertension, they might come in at 32 or 33 weeks until they deliver. They might develop preeclampsia. So we had those 3 hospitalizations: first visit in the clinic, mid-pregnancy, and then until they had their baby. We did not have antepartum fetal testing. We asked the patients if they had good fetal movement, so that was helpful. We were doing urinary estrioles, which turned out to be not very valuable and great effort for the patient in the lab. Dr. Gillespie had a great trick. If the patient told him that the baby wasn't moving well, he would grasp the baby between his hands. This is when she'd be in the hospital before her delivery, and he'd shake it. And if the baby kicked him, he'd think, well, this is good. It's almost like vibroacoustic stimulation on a non-stress test. We had many patients with hydramnios that so compromised respiratory status, we had to do decompression amniocenteses. We still had a stillbirth rate of 5 to 10%. And Dr. Gillespie would always say, it's far better to have a live baby in the NICU than have a stillbirth. And he was right. At the end of my residency, and as I was preparing to go to LA County, Roger Freeman, Dick Paul, the group there, were describing their success with the contraction stress test. So we began doing contraction stress tests. That was the first biophysical antepartum test we had at that time. But
Wow.
didn't have ultrasound yet.
Amazing. And I've now, a lot of things flashes in my mind. I've listened to many lectures about you and stuff. I teach so much of your tricks, the hemoglobin A1C of 8 being an average glucose of 180 and 30 plus, 30 less. I teach that, Steve, all the time. And I could go on so many things you have taught us. But I was always impressed also when I met you personally about how, again, you go from what you just described to you actually were trying to be at the forefront of all the innovations, working even with, industry or other innovators, having the first continuous glucose monitor, the first insulin pumps, and all of that. And I think, you obviously followed your diet, followed the advice of your mentor, but you also kept abreast. Do you want to tell us some more about your own, because they go together, right? You do your best for everybody else, and you're trying to do your best and being an example yourself. You showed your first pump, I remember, at conferences, and I wonder if you could expand on those examples.
Well, I think you learn so much from your patients, and I have learned so much from what my patients have taught me over the years. Their determination, their courage, that has been so important. And I always felt that I wanted to be out on the leading edge of treatments so I could share those with my patients. I'll never forget when meters became available in the late 70s. What a transformation that was. Now as if you were driving a car, you had a speedometer and you knew how fast or slow you were going. And I unfortunately developed hypoglycemic unawareness very early in my uh, time with diabetes. So I really benefited from having meters. And then, of course, with meters, our patients didn't have to be hospitalized as they did before. So meters next to insulin, some would say, I know Mark Landon has pointed out that next to the discovery of insulin, meters themselves were just so valuable. And then I tried using pumps in the early 80s. I didn't think they were safe. But finally, in 1996, I did convert to a pump. I was running every day, um, very busy, working nights. I thought a pump would be a really good way to adapt to my uh, a flexible desire for a flexible uh, lifestyle. And I think that's been very true for our patients as well. And I've been using pump for the past 30 years. CGMs, I was the first patient at Vanderbilt to try them. That was, I think, about 2007, 2008. The CGMs weren't so good and reliable, but boy, we've come a long way with both the automated insulin delivery and hybrid closed loop pumps and CGMs, and it's just going to get better. It's just going to get better.
Do you have an automated system, between the
Yes,
CGM and the pump?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so I have a pump which coordinates with my CGM, and it is one of the pumps, as you well know, that will shut off my insulin if it anticipates I'll be less than 80 in 30 minutes. It will shut off immediately if I'm less than 70. It alerts me if it feels that the rate of decline is too fast. My wife Pat shares the data, and so she can see how I'm doing. Now, Pat can tell if my glucose is low just by talking to me on the phone. She can identify it in my voice. But no, the CGM and the algorithms that link it to the pump are just amazing and allow for much better control than was ever possible in the past.
I love that. No, thank you so much for sharing that story, and also for all the pioneering work you've done to save millions of lives of pregnant women around with through your work in diabetes and pregnancy. As a leader and a physician, through working through so many decades and training so many decades, especially as a leader, how do you stay current with the evolution of medicine? I feel like it keeps changing, right? But then how do you stay current? Are you able to continue to maintain that communication at the same wavelength with the generations that come along?
Well, you have to be very selective. The amount of information that's available every day, day after day, is just overwhelming. So I think I've always said, you should try to be an expert in one area. Doesn't mean you have to be not manage other aspects of maternal fetal medicine, but what is your area? Something you're passionate about, something you're so knowledgeable about, and you can stay up to date on. And I always give the example, you would want to be on the list of 10 most required experts if they were going to have a conference about your area of specialization. Oh, we're going to be talking about preeclampsia. we have to have Dr. So-and-so. We're going to be talking about fetal growth restriction or prenatal diagnosis. We have to have, so focus, focus, focus. And then every day I get a series of papers on Pub Crawler. Pub Crawler is part of PubMed. You can enter into it what your areas of interest are. For me, diabetes and pregnancy, infant mortality, burnout and well-being. And I go through that list each day. I pick out a few papers. I try to be selective, and I share those papers with my colleagues in diabetes, in physician well-being, in infant mortality. My wife, Pat, has created a program called Moms to Be to reduce infant mortality and disparities in infant mortality. So I try to be selective in that respect. And I think the same is true with your time away at conferences. Try to be selective, try to keep focused. Now, when you start off as a resident and a fellow, it may be difficult to decide, but over time, talking with your mentors, you can figure out what area you want to make your life's work.
That's excellent advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you touched on, burnout and wellness a little bit. So I want to
Yes.
segue into that because that I know is also an area of passion of yours, and you've done immense work over there. At what point in your career would you say you started noticing this idea of burnout, and what were you experiencing, and what did you
Yeah.
do to navigate those challenges? And what advice do you have for anyone going through that?
Yeah. So I went to the University of Washington in 1996. I had been the chair at Ohio State for 9 years. Bob Petersdorf, a leader in academic medicine, has said that a chair has three phases in her or his career. The first is the phase of hoping. The second is the phase of coping. And the third is the phase of moping. And each of those phases lasts about 3 years. And he said, after you've been a chair for about 9 or 10 years, it's probably best to let somebody else have a chance. And I thought he was pretty much on target. And I got a call from Carlos Pellegrini, who was chair of surgery and was chairing the search committee at University of Washington, and they had done something very unusual. He called me and said they had surveyed the potential candidates for the new chair. They developed a list of those candidates, and they decided I was the person they wanted. And basically he said, the job is yours unless you tell us you don't want it. Boy, that's a pretty powerful way to recruit someone, don't you think?
Yeah.
And he said, if you don't want the job, you need to tell us and then we'll move on. Well, my wife Pat's family is all from Oregon, and we could drive to their ranch from Seattle and see the family, be with the family. So I said, no, Carlos, I'd like to come out and visit. So I came out and visited, and it's a great department, wonderful medical school, wonderful medical center, lots of efforts in community service, which I really valued. And I was most impressed with the person who was their dean and CEO. He held both positions, Phil Fialco. So I accepted the job, and got there, and I've always made a habit of interviewing people whenever I've taken a new position. I interview the faculty, the administrative leadership, the staff, and I have a series of questions. What do you like about your job? What do you think I need to know is most important for me to know right now? What opportunities do we have? What challenges do we have? Things like that. And you find after you've done 7 or 8 or 10 of these interviews, the themes keep coming back. But what also happens is people say, this person is interested in me and interested in us. And they're not going to just come in here and turn things upside down to turn things upside down. So we developed a strategic plan. And there was a lot of work to do. And I tried to do too much of it myself. I had a turnover in the administrative lead position in my department and struggled trying to find a new administrative leader to manage the business of the department. There were some faculty who had unfortunate medical problems. We needed coverage on L&D or coverage for lectures. I tried to do more of it myself. I was unrealistic in how long it would take us to get to where we wanted to be. I forgot my own advice, which is take small steps, celebrate the victories along the way, take some more steps, celebrate the victories. And I just tried to do too much. And then just 3 months after Pat and I got there, there was a tremendous tragedy. And that is that Dr. Fialco, Dean Fialco, CEO Fialco, who had recruited me, and his wife, Helen, were hiking in Nepal, and they were killed in an avalanche. So it was just a tragedy. Their son was a fourth-year medical student. He actually stayed with us in the department for his residency, Mike Fialco, outstanding physician. And so here I was, this fellow that I looked forward to working with and having as a mentor was gone, but that wasn't the problem for the medical center. They didn't worry. I didn't expect anybody to worry about me. We had to worry about who was going to be the next leader of the medical center. But I found myself alone trying to manage these challenges. And I found myself, being short-tempered. I was never that way. Being unhappy, not expecting a good outcome. This wasn't who I was. I went to an AGOS meeting and I listened to some of the other chairs, and they were sounding just like I was. What's going on here? I went back and talked to a psychiatrist that I knew at Walker, and he said, Steve, this sounds like serious burnout. I began reading about it, working with him, a couple of members of our department, and we developed a study to assess burnout in department chairs in about 2000. We found that across the country, department chairs, over 40% were experiencing significant burnout, high emotional exhaustion scores, working about 70 hours a week, very high scores for depersonalization or cynicism. They did have very high scores for personal accomplishment. They would say, this is a tough job, but somebody's got to do it well. We found that the most important single factor in preventing burnout was the support of spouse, partner, and family. We found that in every study we've done. Also was a sense of self accomplishment, that I can do this job, and also being on the job for at least 5 years. And I was a year or two into it. Based on our findings, I started to develop programs, first of all, to help myself, exercising, deep breathing, mindfulness, time with family, and began to teach others about the importance of well-being. Now, we repeated this study 15 years later. Jeff Fowler and our colleagues at Ohio State, we found that in our first study, less than 10% of the chairs were women. In our second study, 30% were women. We found that the chairs were still working almost 70 hours a week, and they were spending at least half their time in administration. But there'd been a dramatic change in the profile of the chairs. Emotional exhaustion scores were dramatically lower. Depersonalization, dramatically lower. And we had comments such as, resilience is important. I make sure to exercise every day. I make sure to spend time with these things were so important. And I'm sure over the years, people had learned more and more about them. But we did find that the high personal accomplishment scores were gone.
Oh, wow.
And we had comments such as, I don't run the department anymore. The department is run by the medical center, the practice plan, the dean's office, the insurance companies. And I think that's unfortunately, what has happened. And we recognize that is what has happened in medicine. When our son Dan graduated from film school in 2000, Carl Malden, the actor, spoke to his graduating class. And Carl Malden said, Filmmaking is an art, and filmmaking is a business. And you cannot allow the business to compromise the art. That was 25 years ago. Well, medicine is an art, and medicine is a business. And we have allowed the business to dominate the art. I think there are things we can do, and there are things that are being done, but unfortunately, that's what has happened over the years.
Well, thanks for that. That's a beautiful diagnosis, and hopefully some treatments as well. I want you to expand on the fact that you said, burnout. The significant others and family are, the biggest preventative measures, to avoid burnout and stuff. I remember actually another lecture you gave. I remember the moment you were on the podium. I was one of the first rows, and you shared some family issues that had happened early in your life, and the harmony or balance that you can find. I know you talk about Pat, your wife of many decades now. What advice do you have for a young, now mostly women, in terms of finding harmony at home with her partner or his partner? I think that you lived it, and I think you would have some good advice for them.
Well, if you're not careful, one day leads to another day, leads to a week, leads to months, leads to years. And these aren't easy conversations, but you need to have them, especially in a family where both partners have professional aspirations or other aspirations, whether it be in art or teaching, whatever it might be. How are we going to share these responsibilities? This is very difficult. Work life harmony, work life integration. The literature that's available shows us that usually the wife partner is the one that bears much more of the burden and has much more of the burnout experience because she is trying to manage both the family responsibilities and the professional responsibilities. Now, Pat felt that she wanted to reduce her effort at work while our children were small and growing up. Once they reached middle school age, she began to work more full time. She also felt, and she wrote an article about this, an opinion piece in the Green Journal many years ago, that if possible, having a housekeeper or having some domestic help is really important. So the time at home could be spent with family and with your children or with other family members. So I think there need to be some frank conversations. How will we share these activities? How, for example, if I'm off on the weekend, can I help so that you will have time for what you need to do over the weekend? Let's look at our night call schedules so we can decide how we're going to coordinate those. Pat and I would often try to be on call on the same weekend so our housekeeper could be at home with the kids. And when we were off on the weekend, we were together. So things like that, I think, are extremely important.
And did you have any secrets that between the two of you in terms of spending time together, or you stress communication? I know you exercise together. I saw your lectures. I know you bike a lot. I think. Do you want to share some of your personal quality times?
Well, we walk. We walk once or twice a day, and we talk during those walks. We exercise together, but that hour twice a week with our trainer is pretty intense, so we don't get a chance to communicate too much. But 18 years ago, we started an event called Pelotonia at Ohio State James Cancer Hospital Solow Research Institute. It's a bike ride to raise money for cancer research. And over the 17 years to date, we've raised almost $340 million that have gone on to fund an immunology oncology research institute. And Pat and I have ridden every year. Now, the first year, I said to Pat, if we get single bikes, I'll go here, you'll go there, you'll ride with these people, I'll ride with it'll be more time apart. Let's try a tandem. And we had ridden a tandem on Mackinac Island in Michigan, and we had a lot of fun. So we got a tandem, and that's what we ride, a tandem. So that gets us outside, no cell phone, we're in nature, we're exercising, and we talk. And we've had a lot of meaningful conversations, out on our tandem. Uh, when we ride in Pelotonia, and the ride's coming up August 1st, people will pass and they'll say, "Hey, she's not pedaling in the back," which makes Pat very upset. But they'll say, "I wish my partner would do a tandem with me." And I always, be careful what you wish for. Uh, the person who rides in front is the captain. The person who rides in back is called a stoker. And the number one job of the captain is to keep the stoker happy. And I also remind people, and this is a well-known lesson from tandem riding, whatever direction your relationship is going, a tandem will get you there faster.
I
Beautiful.
love
so
that.
so
That
it's something we've enjoyed. Walks, the tandem. Yeah, we enjoy that.
That is so beautiful and so heartwarming to hear. Thank you for sharing that secret to a beautiful marriage and relationship. I also wanted to touch on your love of music. I had the honor to
Yes,
watch your amazing lecture, the last lecture for the Ohio State, which, as Dr. Berghella will share for our listeners on the YouTube link. But you
thank you.
talk a lot about music. Can you tell us about the impact of music in your life and your passion for it?
Well, music, when we talked about burnout, you'll hear people say, "I don't have time. I don't have time for those things." Well, there's what Wayne and Mary Sotil have called small uplifts. I can listen to a Marvin Gaye song or a Chuck Berry song, and in 3 minutes, my mood is fine. I'm been uplifted by that music or other music. So music is a small uplift, as is taking a walk, being outside in nature, reading a thank you note from a patient that you've saved, which is important. But I grew up in Newark, as I said, at a time when doo-wop music, vocal groups were very prominent. Kids I went to school with were in those groups and would actually sing on corners, if you can imagine that, and try to be the best in harmonizing. There was a gospel church across from our school that I would listen to their music. My dad loved opera. My parents were excellent ballroom dancers and danced to the music of the 1940s big bands. When I went to Princeton as the social chair of my eating club, I got to book some of these bands who would come down from New York to perform at our parties. Terrific groups, the Coasters, the Chiffons. Um, and of course, at Ohio State, we have one of the best marching bands. I love to listen to the music of the best damn band in the land, the Ohio State Marching Band. But Nashville was really where I had a chance to develop my love for country music, and especially the women of country music. And I listened to their songs, and I saw that they were singing about divorce, domestic violence, HIV/AIDS, uh, young motherhood. And these were such important themes. So I put those songs together in a talk about the women of country music, and I was so so pleased to be asked to give that talk at the Ryman Auditorium, which people call the Mother Church of Country Music, where country music really came to the fore. And I made sure I was factually correct in what I had to say. I didn't want to make any mistakes. And then a commencement that we had, because there was construction on the campus at Vanderbilt, we actually had a med school commencement at the Ryman Auditorium.
Mhm.
So I got to stand on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium, Hank Williams, you name it, they were there. And my talk was lessons for life from country music.
Mm.
Tim McGraw, Look Like You Were Dying. Leanne Womack, I Hope You Dance. Um, Kenny Rogers, The Gambler. All of these great songs that I hope people would enjoy and remember. I know I remember songs I hear and lessons they're giving.
Wow. That is so beautiful. We're kind of coming down towards the last few minutes. I wish I could keep talking to you for hours. We have so many questions. I'd
Yeah.
love for you to still share. But Vince, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple of quick questions I want to ask, and I want to finish on a high. We've been on a high the whole time. The origin of the Gabbe book. I mean, we
Yes.
really have
Yes.
a legend here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yesterday Messi, today Gabbe. How did that originate?
So Jolie Simpson and Jennifer Niebel were third-year residents at New York Hospital when I was a third-year med student. And I always say academic medicine is a very small world, and you'll see the same people as you move through it over and over. So in 1981, Jolie came to me and said, Steve, I've been asked to do an obstetrics textbook. I told the company that asked me, I'd like to have you and Jennifer join me. We did a needs assessment, and people said, yes, we need another book. We need a book that's written by many different authors who give different points of view. So we decided to do a book, and it would be directed toward residents, although we hoped students and fellows and practitioners and nurse midwives would read it as well, with focus chapters that people would enjoy reading. You have to remember, this was before word processors, fax, internet. It was really a challenge, but we took it on. Mark Landon and Phil Samuels wrote a chapter called, believe it or not, Medical Complications of Pregnancy, which was about half the book. We learned to divide those chapters up as we went along. So it was really Jolie Simpson approaching me, Jennifer Niebel, a very supportive publisher, and getting the first edition out in '86, and then moving ahead with each edition. Mark Landon is now the senior editor, and I hope it continues on, and it's something I am proud of, and I hope it has helped people over the years.
And I have a follow-up. Sorry, Kavita.
No,
Quick
please.
last question for you, Steve. And it relates to humbleness, which is
Oh,
one of your things. Because being Steve Gabbe, and people, especially my generations and younger generations, it's the Steve Gabbe is like the Ohio State, the book, the dean, the CEO, the diabetes in pregnancy, the diabetes for 50 years, type 1. How do you stay like, and I'm sure you walk into audiences and you give lectures and people, really look up to you like a mythological figure. How do you stay humble? What, because some people aim for that or maybe have it, and how do you stay humble with all that admiration?
I came from a relatively humble background, and I saw people struggle to pay their bills and to maintain their lives in terms of simple needs, housing, travel. And, I've never forgotten those. And you must remain humble. If you allow your hubris, your self esteem, to take control, you will lose your sense of judgment. You will begin to think that you are a lot better than you are. A good friend of mine, Bob Marmon, is an expert in this and wrote a book about it. And when you see a leader make a huge mistake and you say to yourself, why would they have ever done that? It's because they've lost that sense of humility. They've lost that humility. They've got an inflated ego. You've got to remain humble. You've got to admit your errors. You've got to laugh about them with other people. When you make a mistake, admit you made a mistake and how you're going to fix things. And that's just what it's all about. I don't have a a list of I've done this and I've done this. You do something terrific. How can we have done it better? Let's move on.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think that is such a beautiful way to end. I have one more final question for you before, you know, if you could describe yourself in one word, Dr. Gabbe, what would that be?
I have two words and they're related. One is I'm an optimist. And the other is, and a friend of mine who's a psychologist said to me, you are a rescuer. You picked the perfect profession and the perfect specialty and subspecialty. You picked medicine, you picked obstetrics and gynecology, especially obstetrics. You picked maternal fetal medicine so you can rescue people. And I'm an optimist, realistic optimist about how things hopefully will go. It's probably why I was a goalie in ice hockey and lacrosse. As a rescuer, I guess I had the last opportunity to stop the puck or stop the ball, but an optimist and a rescuer is what I would say.
Wow, those are absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Before I wrap, do you have any final words you'd like to share for all the listeners around the world and for generations of physicians to come?
Well, thank you. Remember, you're on a long journey. Enjoy every day. Take care of yourself. You and so many others have invested in you, and be sure to take care of yourself as you take this long and I hopefully rewarding journey on your career path.
Thank you so, so much, Dr. Gabbe. This has been an absolute honor. You know, in medicine, we talk about we stand on shoulder of giants. Today, we really have had the privilege of really hearing from one of those giants. And I hope everyone that's listening is
Thank you.
reminded that while very few of us may change medicine to the scale that you have, you know, one of at least you'll have the opportunity to continue to positively impact the lives around us. Like Dr. Gabbe said, small steps and celebrate the wins. Take small steps and celebrate the wins. So thank you so, so much. We really appreciate you spending this hour with us.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Be well.
Bye, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye.